Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm both fatigued and tired from a weekend at the cottage.
Fatigued and tired,
Fatigued
you say?
and tired. Two different types of fatigue, but also rejuvenated, which is what I meant to say. How about yourself?
Definitely fatigued and tired.
Okay.
I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, well, there you go. Lots of activity, but yeah, some good, I think we filled the cup back up, spent some time staring at the water and paddling around, and it was good. Good time with family. So I hope everyone else had a good Labor Day weekend, if you do that type of thing where you are. And if not, we're into fall, and it's the change of seasons.
I mean, I feel like it seems like everyone is really pushing for like fall to start now this year, more so than I think in years past for some reason.
Well, I'm not one of those people. I'm good with the all year spring, summer, I think.
Yeah, I could keep going with the warm weather for a while, I'm not gonna lie.
Okay.
But that's because I am largely still back on the bike, not running, and I definitely find it's a lot easier for me to ride when it's warm out compared to when it starts hitting that shoulder season of being a little cold, little wet.
So while progress is slow, Molly's walking a little better this week than last, which is great. The progress comes over time. Frustrating, no doubt, but there you go.
Just a little frustrating.
So this is, you did an episode if you're wondering what, it's from the Leadville 100 run. Molly had a crash in the run and blew the ankle out. And so, she's coming back from that. And then also added dental surgery onto that just to stack the discomfort and time off, which was probably good. I think it's distracted you a lot from the ankle. Yeah,
the bright side is I really don't feel my ankle anymore because my mouth hurts so much. So if I'm lisping pretty badly in this episode, worse than normal, that is why. This is just not a good recovery week for me, but we are getting there. We're doing what we can with what we have.
Week by week. So today we have an episode we were hoping to do around sort of like different ways you could solve for the fall as far as your training, a little bit of goals. We'll probably do another sort of like goal setting for like the next year, of course. We'll do at least one of those as it is something we love into the fall, winter. But this is sort of thinking, you maybe have finished, world championships for this, a lot of the big marathon mountain bike races, Leadville happened towards the end of August. So a lot of folks are sort of past the big race of the year. Maybe there's one or two small events, but now it's sort of what do you do with the fall? I know a lot of the people and athletes I work with, they're maybe looking now towards 2025. So there is a big gap when you start planning at the season. And then so it is, what do you do with this gap in the schedule? Like, do you just do nothing and wait 4 months and then start your annual training program? Or what do you do with that time?
Spoiler alert, that's not it.
No.
It is definitely like a bit of a weird time because you're not really into like full on like goal setting. Like 2025 still feels kind of far off. So it's kind of hard to think about next year's goals. But I mean, we've done this post a billion times or called it back a billion times. Like there's less time before the 2025 race than you think. I think I did it from like November to Unbound, and it's like you really only have a few outdoor rides, especially if you live in like a northern area, between now and then.
Sure.
Or if you're racing Paris to Ancaster if you're in Ontario. You really only have a few more weeks.
When we're thinking about being able to do the sport, I always laugh at mountain biking in Canada. We don't get to do the actual sport. You might ride outside. Maybe you're like a hard person and you ride outside all year, but it's certainly not. It doesn't look like your mountain bike race if you're riding through a bunch of snow or you're on a fat bike. It's a lot different, or riding on the road. So that's sort of the shorthand answer here is you sort of do the sport as best you can, and that could look like a lot of different things. It could be technical mountain bike riding. It could be a couple fun races. If you need to work on your racecraft, it could be. If you need to work on volume, like your endurance hasn't been good, it could certainly be, lots of road riding through the fall, if you are a mountain biker. So lots of different ways. So we'll look at a few different options for the fall in this episode.
Yeah. So let's maybe back up to like the A race itself. And what's sort of your take on the aftermath of the A race? Because I mean, we've often talked about the peaks and valleys, and you're doing all this tapering, you're doing all this preparation so that when you hit race day, you're at the absolute peak. So what happens after that? Like, do we do just like a drop off? Do we do like a slow, descent? Do we try to like never leave the peak? Like,
well, and I guess it depends what you're speaking about explicitly. So there's the sort of the training load or training stress. It might have actually peaked earlier, because you usually have the peak in that towards in your base or your accumulation phase, your general preparation phase. That's usually when you have the most amount of training load. Your hours are the highest, right? So that might be earlier than your A race, because then you start tapering the volume and the load ahead of the A race. Usually, this is sort of stereotypical, but that's generally the idea. You usually don't train maximally in the 1 or 2 weeks before. You usually are resting and traveling and getting ready for the race.
I think I more meant it in like you're trying to get your peak fitness,
right? So
for
your
the race.
Fitness for the task, yeah, which is important, right? Because sometimes we think about volume or how many hours we're training. That's very common that we get almost obsessed with. I do, whatever number of hours is magical for you, is that's how you know you're fit, but it may not actually be the way to be the fittest for the task of the race that you're doing. There's probably lots of examples of people training almost not at all, the week ahead of their race and then doing great, whether that was planned or not, right? They got sick or the travel, they didn't have their bike before the race and then they won the race or something, right? So in the week before the race, that's less important. But yeah, the idea you're saying is like you're at peak form, you're really focused, you're really prepared for the race, you did all the nutrition stuff and all the gear stuff and whatever, it all came together. And then after the race, it can certainly be tempting to try and like hold on to that feeling forever.
Yes, for sure. So what's the best thing to actually happen? Because you don't want to lose all of it, obviously. Like, we do want to see that progression over the years. So it's not, or year over year over year.
Yeah.
So it's not like you want, if I'm drawing kind of like a big line up and here you're at your peak, we don't want to drop down to where we were when we first started riding a bike, right? Like, we don't want to like back down so far. We want to like come down the mountain, but like to a high, like stop at a higher altitude.
Sure.
This makes a lot more sense if we were doing video, but just bear with me.
Which we've stopped doing video for anyone with YouTube. We may bring it back, but the episodes will still be available on YouTube, of course, because that's how Google Play lists Google Play Podcasts have moved to YouTube, whatever the music thing is. So you can still do that if you're a YouTuber. You just won't necessarily see moving pictures of us, which is probably better. The images are very nice. Here, great images. Where are we going with that? So the idea, if you were going to try and visualize this, you could have a mountain where you start at 0 and then you climb up to the top of the mountain and then you go back down to 0. So that would be, someone gets ready they want to do a triathlon. They've never trained before. They train, all through the winter, and they're going to get ready for a July Ironman. They do it, and then they never exercise again. Maybe they just, go back to walking and going to the gym, and they don't even pay attention to training anymore. That might be that scenario of like from 0 to 100 to 0. Yeah. But for us athletes, what we love to see, if you looked back at my, the chart that in my head is the Performance Manager TSS chart, which is a way to map out load. But you could think about this as hours or your fitness or however you want to think about this. What you should see is actually like you started recording at least, or you started training, and it builds up. And maybe your first year, it doesn't get that high. And then you took a little bit of break. So it comes down maybe even as much as say 50%, 30 to 50%. Decrease in whatever we're talking about, and then it builds back up. And maybe when you're younger or newer, those little peaks get a little higher, but when you're like me, you barely get to the same level probably most years, right? Like, it's been pretty level the last few, but it's down certainly from when I was in my 20s and 30s and had more time to train, right? More willingness to train, but now it's not as high.
Now, you're a special case though, because when you were younger, you were an elite level racer. Sure. There's a lot of people, I would include myself here, who are still on an upswing because they just didn't come from a background of being having that super, super high peak when they were younger.
Well, and again, we have to be careful what we're talking about, because if we're talking about mapping out like the fitness, which could be whatever your power numbers or your race results, this could look different, right? Like, in some ways you could argue that I'm maybe slightly lower than at times in my career, but then in other ways I'm like almost as good because I'm smarter with training and everything else and experience and, whatever, have good equipment and things like this. It's interesting how we map out our success like that and our past histories. So
at any rate, We've come down off of the A goal.
So last week, I think I said, the saying is you step off or you fall off. So the fall off would be, let's look at an extreme example. Like imagine you didn't get hurt at your 100-miler, or, anyone who's done a 100-mile bike race or run. They're extreme, you're very tired. And then the next weekend you go back and you try and start doing it. And you'll see this, like people are back trying to run on the Tuesday after the 100-miler. And I don't mean just like a little shakeout, run with the dog, assuming everything is okay injury-wise, probably you could get away with that. But I think with running especially, you'd want to be very careful with the neuromuscular fatigue and bone stress and yada yada. But it would be getting back to it soon. And the problem is the fatigue's still there, and any of these injuries could still be there. I've seen this with saddle sores are still there. And so something in the body, this could be psychological, motivational, this could be, again, skin, this could be bones, this could be the metabolic demands, like the calories it took. You don't get back on top of it, which sounds like a great thing to lose weight, but like the problem is your body will eat itself, and you'll start seeing poorer and poorer performance or injury or illness or all three eventually, right? Like you'll just keep working, trying to do 100-milers, and you'll keep going slower and slower. And so that's like an extreme example, but there are extreme people out there where it could be anything like that. So even our world championship folks who raced on the weekend, raced very, very hard at altitude, traveled to Europe, traveling home, could be back at it this coming weekend, right into cyclocross, right? And you could see the same thing where it's just intensity, missed sleep, time zone, meals are off. So then again, you'd fall off that peak eventually, right? So you can see how that analogy is like, you could just back off for a week or two, which doesn't even mean a complete break, but just not trying to return to 100 miles or return to maximal intervals. It might just be 2 weeks where you sort of, I call it go through the motions, which has a negative connotation, but like a little bit more tempo-y instead of maximal, like, vomiting intervals. So I think that's the concept there, is you just sort of back off and let the structure come out a little bit. And every person's different, right? Whether it's intensity or the structure or the level of focus or the volume, depending on what you did and who you are, it might just need, the backing off might have to be a little different.
Yeah. And I will say the post-race time is, much as I am in a lot of pain right now and not really psyched on it, also the good time to get some of this like life health stuff done. And we've talked about that in November, kind of the more traditional off season. But I think it's worth pointing out now, like if you did just finish your A race and you have kind of couple down weeks, this is probably a great time to have planned like your at least like dentist appointment or like
and all of it, blood work, all of it for sure. Anything you've been sort of putting off, that could be family time, that could be appointments, that could be work projects. I think so. I think there's always that like dream scenario where you don't have to do anything, but I don't think that's the reality for masters, right? Where, because they say, be careful running all your errands on your Monday off day, because then you're going to be tired when you return to train on Tuesday. But the reality is you're probably going to go get your hair cut that day, right? Like it's nice to think that you could smash all the stress on the Tuesday or something like that. But yeah, I don't know that that's how time works.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, especially with this, A race situation, like God knows for us, we got back from Leadville and we have a ton of stuff that had to get done.
Yeah, cyclocross season is busy and just all that. So, here's the other paradigm that we're looking at. This isn't for everyone, but you talked about January 1st, we'll do goal setting end of year. But when you think about it from again, this is like who is the standard cyclist or your typical cyclist. But I would say if you took most cyclists, the A race, the big race, the adventure you're doing probably occurs, say, May to August. Like I would say that's like a lot of people. I have lots of clients that I have their training peaks. There's the outliers of Iceman or Big Sugar or what else is left? I don't know. Like a fall marathon. What else is coming? Like everything, most of the big stuff.
Cyclocross, but
of course.
For most people that I think, you work with, cyclocross is usually the second sport. Like it's rare that you would have a client who's just a cyclocross racer at this point.
And we spoke a bit about those types of seasons, I think last week, right?
Yeah, we were talking about cyclocross season. And
so let's just pretend like, okay, I had like something big. I had mountain bike nationals. I had Leadville. I had a stage race. I had a whatever the thing is you did over the last 2 to 4 months. So now is actually the time to decide what you're going to do, because now the timer for 12 months or less to your event is going. As Molly said, there's less time than you think. But I would say now is the time where you should be assessing. Molly said she's not going to announce what her next big thing is, but like, what is it, right? Like, you're thinking about that right now.
God, I don't know, Glassford. Give me a break.
If you think about this, I love the map analogy that, like, when we're goal setting, we're sort of saying, like, where are we, point A, and where are we trying to go, point B on our map, and then what's the road to get there, the windy road, and there's some alternate paths for when things go away. And am I going to have a guide that's your coach? I always say, like, you could get a training plan that's just like a map off the shelf, but you still have to find yourself and find the goal and deal with the twists and turns. And then we make our 3-month custom plan. This is sort of an ad for that, where I highlight the route for you and then hand you the map, and then you follow that highlighted route. But you might get off track sometimes, and there might be some closures, and you have to adjust the route here and there. And you could always book a phone consult if you needed to, and call me up and I'll help you with your route.
And you can find that at consummateathlete.com.
And then, of course, coaching, again, just sort of laying out our services, but also sort of just like the idea of goal setting is that, like, that is the role of the coach, is to be a guide by your side, where, like, we have the map together, we've agreed on where you're going, we try and triangulate where you are, which is tough, with, testing how you did in the races previously. This is why experience is important, because it gives you an idea of where you are on the map. If you're just that new person who's trying triathlon for the first time, we have no idea where you are on the map. So it's very hard to even use a map, right? The upside is that probably anything's going to put you on the map. So at least we know where you are. But you see how that map analogy is really nice, because it does sort of say, oh, I see. So if I keep doing this, I get a better idea of where I am and how to get to that point, because I've been to the top of that mountain before, or a similar mountain. And now I have all the equipment and I know how to get there. And maybe I have the coach and I know how they work. And so I think that's just such a great way to think about it. But we have to do that work in September for a lot of us, or late August for, in your case, you had a bit of August to help with that planning. For me, I've had since July and I still don't know the answer. So I need to get working on that. But that's what we're doing, so that then when we do ask the question, which is this podcast episode, what do we do with our fall? Well, now we know these are the next steps in our map. So if we've done the goal setting, we've laid out our map, point A, point B, well, then we know the first, 2 steps of that. And in a lot of cases, it's not rocket science. It's like, well, keep doing, it looks like the thing, and maybe some skills and maybe some endurance. But I think that's an important first step to this question. And this fall is are you sure you want to do that? That's another one of our popular posts, is can you prepare
for the goal you've set, and do you want to?
Right, which it's okay to revisit these goals. I have a few clients who are sort of like looking and like, do I actually want to do these super long races, or did I get sort of sucked in to, like, everyone goes longer all the time? You might be in this boat too.
I was going to say, I'm definitely in that boat. I'm definitely thinking towards I'm actually trying to reverse that question of, like, really leading with, do I want to prepare for the goal? So as I'm kind of having these ideas come to my head, like in my head, I'm like, okay, I've done most types of racing at this point, so I kind of know what each one entails. So I'm kind of rolling tape on, like, what each one is going to look like. And
so track running now.
So yeah, we're going to go for our good friend and my co-author, Misha Powell, who we just put out her book, Sprinting Through Setbacks, with Strong Girl Publishing. She's coming up this weekend to hang out with me. Anyone from Collingwood is listening to this, hang out with us at VO2 Sports on Friday. We're going to do a jog. Or
are we sprinting?
Jog.
Okay.
Just a jog.
If I challenge her to a sprint, do you think she'd take me on?
I think you're going to get your ass kicked, but you can try.
Okay.
We're going to do that on Friday, do a book talk, have a book signing. Actually, on that note, you know what we're using to sell all of her books to make life very easy for us?
Is it a payable form?
It is, in fact, a payable form. So we do have to quickly pause here and give a shout out to our good friends over at Payable. So if you're trying to basically sell anything, whether it's online or just kind of need like an easy way to quickly be able to use your phone or someone else's phone to, have someone kind of check out in real life, Payable add-on for Google Forms makes it like so freaking easy to just get set up in like 2 minutes, and boom, you have a way to take credit cards and PayPal.
And let's be honest, we've all made a Google form. Yeah. Like, you made it for work or the Girl Guides or like whatever you've done that for. You probably also had to collect some funds for something associated with that. So the summer camp registration, maybe you're a bike coach and you're trying to do a camp or a clinic, a jersey order. A lot of people. Maybe it's even just like your team or your friends are doing a jersey for someone's retirement party or the 24-hour race you're doing. So anything that you need to collect a name, an address, a size, and then a bit of money, this works so well for it.
So slick, so smooth. We know a lot of parents that have used it for actually selling their kids Girl Scout cookies because no one wants to have to collect cash. What a competitive advantage.
All the other kids dealing in cash and check, and you're going digital.
Here's the URL, like go on your own phone or use mine, like boom, boom, boom.
The other neat thing I've done with it is invoicing. So we've set it up so that like actually I fill it out for a potential client, and then I invoice them by putting their email into the form and then clicking the things that they're going to get, and it sends them basically a card to check out, and then they can check out using their credit card or their PayPal or whatever different one you use. So it's sort of like an invoicing tool that's really fast and better than using, if you're not a spreadsheet person.
Yeah, and they have a ton of free templates and everything. So if you, want to get started and you're just like, oh, I hate building Google Forms, they have them. You can pretty much click, the one that's closest to whatever you're trying to do and, just change around the info to fit your stuff, toggle the form on, and you're taking money.
And I have had a few people ask, does Payable take the money? And actually, they're actually just facilitating the Google form to either PayPal, Square, Stripe, any of those sort of like merchants that you're familiar with and probably have an account already. It just pairs with whatever account you have for payment for the merchant processing, and then links it to the Google form. Yeah,
so we will drop a link into the show notes here with sort of some of our favorite stuff from Payable, or just head to payableapps.com to find out more info. Okay, so now that I've shouted out both Misha and Payable, okay, so we sort of have like two different ways to kind of look at fall. There's the one side where like you already have cyclocross or a big gravel goal, and like we're not talking to you in this episode.
No, I
we
think
talked
you're
to you
good.
Last week. You're doing great.
Yeah, and you probably need to hold on and do that goal. Like you're on the map, you're on the like last, that tricky, that precarious peak. As you get to the peak, it's precarious when we're climbing mountains. So you need to stay focused on that. And Molly always cautions she doesn't think you should be looking at your other goals.
I was going to say, we talked about this in early July. Like the number one tip I always have is like, don't think about your next thing after the A race.
Now, can I add,
after the season.
There's probably an exception to that too. There's probably, because you had Leadville 2024 for years.
Sure.
And so there was like, I'm doing this race, and that is like part of this like big mountain range that you're building towards.
It's more not adding new stuff and kind of like already just looking past the current season and like almost like pretending that it's already over.
And you weren't looking at the tech guide. I would say I was much more into watching, like even last year, what happened at Leadville this year, so we could know everything about it ahead of time and the videos and the whatever. Whereas you were more focused on like, we raced in October last year, and so it was more like preparing for that October race. So those folks, I think that's like, it's clear you have a goal for the fall. So like you've already answered the podcast question here of, what do I do with my fall?
Yeah. But if you are someone who already hit your A race, you're heading into the fall, you don't really have your goal yet, or maybe you have your kind of like murky, you have your goal even, but you're just not really like, you're not up to speed yet. So this is where we started talking about the let's talk about the park/bus bench concept, because this I think is the easy
Dan John
intro.
has this one. There's a few different ways to think about this, but his is, as with most things Dan John comes up with, they're pretty good. So he has the park bench and the bus bench, and the idea is that these are sort of the two phases of the season. So we might call them the general preparation and the specific preparation periods or phases. And so Dan John just says, like, are we in a rush right now? And when you're in the park, the idea is that you sit there, you enjoy the park. You're not on a timeline to leave at any time. You're not watching for certain numbers. You're just going through the motions. You're in the park, so check mark. You're in the park. 80% is a passing grade. There's maybe something that you do. Maybe you go to the park and you play a sport, or you do a little walking route, but you're not timing the walking route. That sort of thing, right? So just there isn't a rush or a huge urgency, but you are there. You're sitting on the bench is the idea, right? Like you're ass in seat. You're present. You're there. You're showing up, but again, it's not as urgent, in time. And then the counter to that, the specific preparation, or the bus bench, you want the bus to come at the time the bus is supposed to come. So you're watching your watch, you're timing, your time on the bench, because you need to get where you're going on time. And so there's a much more urgency and scheduling and specificity. You need to be on the right bus, on the right bench, at the right time, so that you arrive at your goal, right? Your destination. So I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. And so for most of us, it's not so urgent right now. So again, if we're coming into a long weekend, there's a missed Saturday because a friend's having a birthday, probably okay. Shift things the other way. The intervals don't feel great. The hill isn't perfect. Like, show up, put your butt in the seat, but we're not stressed, right? We're not, I would say the intervals should be a little more open. It's not that we don't do intervals. It's just they're a little bit more open, right? It might be, we might use words like moderate instead of sweet spot or something like that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think this weekend for us is a really good example of that. In past years, we may have been a little less good about doing this and be like, oh, we're on a family thing. Cool. This is a good chance to get my 4-hour ride, 4-hour run, whatever in. This week, I mean, I was sort of stuck with doing what I could with what I had, but I think it was a good lesson for me. And like, okay, I can stay active and keep moving around this weekend as much as I'm like able to, but I'm very much focused on the time with family. And I think it was honestly like a pretty big relief to not have those kind of competing stressors. So.
Call that maybe the gift of injury, that it wasn't so much willpower or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, it's not as attractive. Sort of like when it's raining out, you don't have the urge to add a lot of time to your training or something.
Yeah.
It's easy to take an off day if it's just miserable weather out. So that's that, I guess.
So kind of the two sides here as well. So we have, we're thinking about the kind of more park bench side of things. And here's where we kind of have both base training for your sport, but also cross training. So do you want to kind of get into how the two of them can either interact with each other, be sort of just like where we'd go in the fall typically?
Well, that general preparation period, I like that name. It sort of describes it. It's general, right? So really anything can be done in the general preparation period or base period. Those are sort of similar things, concepts. So you could certainly ease into cross training. So for cyclists, this means that like if you do have grand plans to run or cross country ski or do CrossFit or lift weights, it would be a great time to ease into it over September, where something like 1 set of 8 in your strength training or 30-minute walk with 6 by 30 second runs.
I was just going to be like, 30 minutes? Let's go
which again fits with this, you're trying to take a little bit of time for family and work. So something like a 30-minute walk with, gradually increasing run periods, we could call that a run walk, might be perfect, right? And then again, you're going to feel a little sore or a lot sore the next day. We could certainly do an episode if folks are curious about, cyclists trying to run successfully over the fall. That might be a good episode to put on in the hopper here. But maybe we'll wait to see if anyone, pluses that. What is that called? People give a thumbs up. +1.
But also, now I'm just thinking like a reel that's just instead of cyclists trying to successfully run, it's just cyclists trying to run.
Right. Which looks a lot like 1 10K run followed by a week off everything.
Yeah.
So that, again, strength, 1 set of 8, do that for a month. You should find that great progress not doing a ton of stuff. Certainly there can be some good warm-up and mobility and sort of whatever else in there. But again, not belaboring it, under half an hour for the strength. That's all stuff that's going to lay the foundation for... a lot of times we'll call this phase even the preparation phase. If you're going to break into more phases of the year, like base 1, base 2, base 3, you could have a preparation phase, which is, again, a great word to use to help guide the athlete. This is the period you're preparing to do a lot of cross training and a lot of strength and heavier strength and more bike volume even. So I would say it's okay this time of year to continue biking if that's motivating and convenient and something you want to do. But again, starting back just like easier, not as focused, not as big a volume, just sort of laying that foundation out to get going, right? And again, the body's going to be recovering through a lot of this stuff as well. So just nothing massive. But I would say, assuming there aren't major injuries, there's nothing wrong with going into a bit of a accumulation or base phase this time of year either, where you are doing some longer. And I had sometimes I've started asking what an athlete's definition of long is. My definition is around 90 minutes to 3 hours is good for most of us. Not that 5 isn't okay sometimes, but as we get into like +5, I think sometimes that's becoming excessive in a lot of scenarios. Not that there wouldn't be any case for it, but bread and butter. There's a lot of gain to be had by repeating that 90 to 3 hours a lot.
Well, and you mentioned accumulation, and that actually makes me think about skills accumulation, because I think this is actually a fantastic time, especially for mountain bikers, to really practice the skills that they maybe struggled with during 100%. The season, especially the ones that they were like a little nervous to really work on, because you don't want to get hurt during your season working on that. So
if you took a beeline, if you got hurt, if you're nervous about stuff, this is a lot, if not most people would have something in one of those 3 categories. Then this is a great time. Yeah, chip away at it. Go to a clinic. Go get some pads and go downhilling and get a lesson. Go and figure it out. But it is, we get to July every year and it's like, well, if you didn't learn it yet, I guess now isn't the time to learn how to drop off or jump or do whatever the thing is.
Well, and the funny thing is, especially with mountain biking in Ontario, and I know on the East Coast for like most places, it's not dry enough to ride until like late May, early June. Mm-hmm. Yet for some reason we all stop riding mountain bikes in the fall, because then it's like, oh, it's cyclocross, or like, oh, we're in base phase, so we stop riding mountain bikes, even though fall is actually usually the optimal mountain bike time, but the season is over. Which
is great. It's sort of, you don't see it in coach education. You'd always lay out these really like beautiful, charts, maybe scary charts, where you have your periodization, right? So the seasonal plan, and if they get really advanced, you'll start having the skills built into that, right? Mm-hmm. And so you would have like, when would you do these skills, or the psychological training, mental training, or these things, and you periodize all that. Nutrition would be another thing now that we're periodizing.
Yeah, like mental and nutrition to me are great for, late fall, early winter when the weather starts turning. Like that's a fantastic
makes sense
time.
Weather, yeah.
Skills and base make sense now when it's still pretty nice out and you actually want to be outside.
So you could call this as preparation. You're preparing because eventually we're going to want you to do these skills within your intervals, and then eventually within the race, right? Mm-hmm. As we get into, call it your specific phase or your competition phase, those skills need to be, you need to acquire them. So accumulating fitness, load volume is what people think about, but it's actually accumulating skills, or the starts of skills that then we can embed in the sport, when there's intensity and on a course, right? Versus in a field, or in our friends out down at Joyride in Markham, they have a bike park and they have a foam pit. So if you've never jumped, you can just go jump into a bunch of foam. Mm-hmm. But it's a big investment in time to get down there to do that. But now would be a great time. And as Molly said, that's a winter thing you could do as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there are any skill accumulation things that you'd like to hear more about, whether it's, you want to hear from a nutritionist or a mental performance consultant, or you just want us to talk more about mountain bike skills, definitely hit us up over at consummateathlete.com or at consummateathlete on Instagram. As always, we appreciate you. Leave us ratings, reviews, let us know what you want to hear more of, what you want to hear less of, etc. Thanks so much for tuning in. Happy training, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.